Hi, everyone. I'm Eric Solbakken, and welcome to the Viking Academy podcast. On today's episode, we have Purdeep Sangha. Now, Purdeep is the CEO of Sangha Worldwide. He is an ultra performance coach for business leaders. And specifically on this interview with him, we're going to talk about his book, The Complete Man, and his understanding of the psychology around being a complete man. Now, for the Viking Academy, we're not specifically for men or exclusively for women. It's for both. It's a framework to help you explore the three dimensions of yourself, is exploring yourself through the mind, body, and spirit. And Purdeep completely encompasses that. He actually surprises me in this podcast of his deep understanding and integration of the spiritual side. I knew he was really deep into the mindset. He uses neuropsychology and performance psychology to unravel and unlock people's performance. But we also go down the route of personal experience with his family and alcoholism, and I share my story of alcoholism. And we will talk about the three frameworks that he has within the Complete Man that you can apply to any person, man, woman, child, for that matter. So I hope you enjoy this podcast as much as I did. You'll see that Purdeep and I got along like a house on fire, as we always do. So as always, let's go explore. Purdeep, where the hell have you been? I haven't seen you in forever.
Eric, man, yeah, it's been a while. It's good to catch up. It's been what, probably 4 months, 3 months.
Yeah, and we were talking to each other like on a regular basis, like bi-weekly, weekly at one point, looking to get some things off the ground. And you and I have both gotten different things off the ground, which I'm looking forward to talking to you about. The Viking Academy is one of those. And so here we are, the Viking Academy podcast. I'm really excited about this one. And I'm really excited mostly to get into your brain, and I want to talk about your book and your coaching around the Complete Man. That's what I want to dive into today. And plus catch up, because I mean, we haven't seen each other for a long time. So I'm sure there's a lot more where we can go down. We're going to go down a lot of rabbit holes, but I see we can keep this as coherent as possible.
Sounds good to me.
Right on, man. So the Complete Man, the book, it's been a while since I read it, and I went back in and I brushed myself up again on it. And the reason why I wanted to bring you in, especially on the Viking Academy podcast, is there's an alignment there with your thinking and your teaching around the Complete Man and the Viking Academy's vision of finding your purpose, your passion and purpose in life by diving into your mind, your body, and your spirit. And, you know, with the Complete Man, can you just give me let's get the listeners a little background on who you are and what you do and what got you to write The Complete Man, the book, The Complete Man.
Yeah, sounds good to me. So I'm a kid of immigrant parents. They came over in the 70s. They landed in British Columbia. And so not too far from you, Eric, they were in Kelowna. And that's where I grew up. That was pretty much, you can say, my upbringing. I grew up on an orchard, which I think was probably one of the best things I could have asked for, or not even asked for, I could have had as a kid, because that was a big part of the Complete Man as well. And I can talk about that when we get into it. I grew up on an orchard. I was surrounded by strong men. My dad, for example, uncles, and they just knew how to work hard, right? They were shoveling all day long. They were doing physical labor. This is before they actually brought in more machinery to do the work instead of, human power. And so that's how I grew up, which then shaped a lot of who I am today and the concept of the Complete Man. And alongside of that, my great-grandfather was a spiritual teacher in India for 60 plus years.
Dude, I did not, whoa. I didn't know that.
Yeah, in India. So he was my great-grandfather. And so that's a big part of our lineage, and a big part of why, again, everything kind of came together. That's a big element of it. So he taught my grandfather, who then also immigrated over to Canada. And when I was a young boy, about 8 or 9 years old, he is the one that taught me about spirituality. He is the one that taught me about meditation, mindfulness, principles, because here's the interesting part. There's a very big alignment between spiritual practices and even military practices, because it all comes back to discipline, right? And everything in moderation. And so those are key elements of being the Complete Man. But then, if we take a look at the real motivation for me writing the book was my dad, because I saw my dad, I saw his struggles, and I saw him being a business owner and giving everything to his family and then leaving very little for himself and not being able to cope with it effectively, and then dealing with alcoholism, and that exacerbated. So what I do today, based on all of, there's a lot more to that, but, fast forward today, I've made it my mission to work with men, particularly professional men, men who are CEOs, executives, business owners, to help them be successful in all areas of their life. We created a firm where someone could come to us and say, hey, Pradeep, you know what, we want to grow our business. Or, hey, look, I'm having challenges on the personal side. I just want to learn how to have a better work-life balance or have better relationships, or both. Because I wish my dad had someone when he was going through his challenges to be able to lean on or get support from or get insight from. So that's essentially what we do today.
You know, I jokingly said that you're like my brother from another mother, but after all that stuff you just told me, it's like even more so. Like I'm also, my parents immigrated to Canada in 1969. I was then born a couple months later in the beginning of 1970. Immigrant parents. I'm a recovered alcoholic. I'm a recovering alcoholic. And my journey has been about diving deep into spirituality and starting with that as a base. Like that for me, the spiritual foundation, shall we say, is to come from there first and then straighten. And you know, because that's what you teach you in the recovery program. It's like you got to clean up spiritually first, and then you'll clean up mentally and physically. Not in the other way around. Like don't start with your physical or your mental first, and then try and get spiritual first, then mental and physical. So yeah, but I didn't realize that about the spiritual teaching. So we're going to go down a whole bunch of great roads here. So you saw your dad struggle. Did you struggle?
Well, I struggled as a kid seeing my dad struggle because it was a love-hate relationship. And I also struggled a little bit later on too. But if I take a look at my dad, when I was a young boy, watching him drink. So when he was sober, my dad was awesome. You know, we're talking about, you know, being a Viking, for example, but, you know, it's, let's just say a similar kind of a way in the Indian tradition, because there's a whole history about Sikhism and how Sikhism started, which is, you know, the religion of Sikhs in Punjab. And my dad was one of those guys that was extremely masculine. Like you didn't have to see him to feel his presence in the room. Like he just had it. But he was so, I'm going to say, in tune with his masculinity. It wasn't even a conscious thing. It's just who he was. That he could also be very emotional. He was the most emotional man I know as well. And no one questioned his masculinity. But the challenge when you asked about struggle was that when he drank too much, he was a completely different guy. He was a big dude, 6'1", 240 pounds, strong. Like, and sometimes he just was like a bomb went off, right? So if something pissed him off and he was drunk, right, it's like run, right? Or what I learned, because it just happened to be part of who I was, and I guess the person, being the older son, I was the person that calmed him down. So I was the only person that was able to calm him down. And for some reason, my dad and I kind of built this bond where, you know, when he was upset and I was around him, he felt more calm. Like I literally would put my dad to bed when he was drunk as a young boy, right? And then as we got older, like it was just kind of like, okay, Dad, you're hammered. Let's pick you up, put you to bed. And that was a very, I'm going to say, painful experience, because I was freaked out, because I was like, if my dad woke up, I knew my dad would never harm me by any means. He loved us, right? My brother and I. But if he woke up and something was like, he was just in a rage, he would have night terrors, like literally night terrors in the middle of the night. And you could hear him just screaming. I think something happened in his past, and he hasn't fully, well, he's passed away now, but he hadn't dealt with it. My grandfather was in the military in India for 30 plus years. As I said, you know, he was a very spiritual man, but also, so this is kind of, I want to make sure people understand. So my great grandfather was a spiritual teacher. His son, my grandfather, was a very spiritual man, but also in the military for 35 years, away from his family for 10 months out of the year. So my dad was raised by his uncle a lot of the time, so he was not a good influence, who drank a lot, was just not a, I'm going to say, very straight arrow like my grandfather was. And something must have happened. My grandfather also took him to military camps a couple of times, like when he would be away in other parts of India. He took my dad as a young boy. And I don't know if something happened during those periods, because I don't think that's a right place to be for young kids, is because we're not talking about the military camps here. We're talking about different military camps, like sometimes drinking your own piss, right? Because back in those days, you know, it's India. It's a third world country. So I think he had some challenges in his life that he brought into adulthood, which we kind of absorbed as kids, mainly me as an older son. But I'm going to say, without a shadow of a doubt, was a huge, huge positive experience for me, because I learned so much. I learned about the human psyche, and I purposefully started to study his behavior. I learned about men in particular, because I would study him and other guys, and and it's a reaction with my mom, and then the differences in gender roles, which is really interesting right now, right? Because that's being hugely challenged and kind of thrown upside down. But that gave me the skill to be able to have these conversations with men. And so you ask again, did I struggle? Yeah, there's probably a period of time in my life where in my 20s, because of that, I had this anger in me with my dad, because it's a messed up relationship to have when you love your dad so much, right? And you can rely on him when he's sober. He would there be in an instant, right? I could call him and he'd be there. I could ask him for as much money as I wanted. He would give it to me. Not that I did, but he would. But when he's drunk, it's like, I hate my dad. So that internal aspect of me, I never reconciled until I was probably in my 30s and late 30s. And that ate me up. So when I would drink, sometimes I actually started drinking, but more partying. I wouldn't get violent, but maybe I drank too much and did some stupid stuff. But there was a period there where I just didn't feel good about myself. There was just something inside of me that I just hadn't dealt with. And that took me a while, but I got past it.
And there's so many things I could go down, so many topics I can unpack there. But one of the things that kind of just struck me was, again, my experience with life so far. And I'm continually exploring the three aspects of my nature, like my mind, my body, my spirit. This is what we're doing right now. Like I'm exploring this now, and you're teaching me as you're, because I think we're all collaborating with one another on this planet. Like we all collaborate. Yep. Like I don't see myself above or below anybody else. I'm in a collaborative state where I'm collaborating with every person. Even the little baby I saw at Starbucks this morning, I'm collaborating with them by interacting with them, right? But it took me a long time to get to that point in my life where I understood that clearly. I'm listening to your experience on what you had to go through, the painful relationship with your father, to the man that you are now, and to see the passion and the purpose that you have when you're bringing this forward, and you bring in the complete man forward. It's like the universe knew what it was doing. It was giving you all these tests and trials. And when you look back in 2020 vision, you can go, oh, that's why that happened. Like that's why these things happen along the way, is so that I could become the person I am today. Right. And so bringing that message to, say, with the next generation, not wanting them to suffer the way we did, or at least being aware of the fact that these trials and tribulations are all part of your growth process. It's all part of tuning you into who you really are here to become. And then I see this experience that you had, and all these, like, I didn't know those points you told me about your past, and we've talked so much, but that was just like to see all those come together. All of a sudden it all makes sense why, of course, you would write The Complete Man. Of course you would be passionate about helping men. And not only that, but business owners and men. Like that's the other part. Like that's why you and I click so well, is like we're addressed in the mind, body, and spirit, but also in business. And we love that combination. And I can see that clearly, for that. If you could go back and talk to yourself, okay, your younger yourself, when you were going through that with your dad, what advice would you give yourself?
I probably would have told myself, it's going to be okay. Like, it's okay. You're going to get through this. You're going to get through this stronger. Because my wife asked me all the time, like, why don't you get stressed? I have a very high stress tolerance, and nothing really bothers me, except for if it's with my kids. Something's happening there. Otherwise, it's like, whatever. I get a business failure. Oh, well, whatever. Move on. It's because of that experience that I had with my dad, I would say, was some of the most terrifying moments of my life. Like, I remember those. And it's not because I knew he was going to hurt me, because he wouldn't. It was just seeing someone that wasn't able to help themselves and being helpless in that space, because you want your loved ones to not suffer. I knew my dad was struggling more than I was, right? Like that was the most painful part, because he wanted to get better. He wanted to get past it, but it wasn't acceptable at that time for men, especially in the Indian culture, to go to AA. Picking up a self-help book wouldn't have been something, because he didn't fully understand the concepts of English, right? In English writing. So that was his journey. In fact, I can tell you, so I'm kind of making this long-winded, but I do look back, and sometimes I do, put myself in those shoes, and I just give myself a little bit of love and comfort and say, it's okay. Like, you'll be good. And I look at my son, because my son is 11 years old, and I look at him and I say, wow, like, because it's being a dad isn't easy, as you know. right?
Oh, trust me, I know. Isla's 11, and we just found out she lied about something, and Aaron and I are having our first.
Oh,
How do we deal with this situation? So I've got two older kids too, so I've been down that path. So I totally know what you're talking about.
yeah, it's one of those most experiential things that I think every man should go through at some point. I look at my son and I have to be very careful because there's a part of me, and this is a role of us men to teach our sons and to make sure that they grow up with values and principles, be able to see him for who he is, to see his soul, to see what he is really about rather than what I want to project onto him. That is something that is so important, right? Because I don't want him to look back and say, you know, my dad held me back from this or projected this on me or did whatever. And that's always going to happen. Again, I'm making this long-winded. Going back, I do look at myself and say, it's going to be okay. You know, you're going to get better as a result of this. You're going to help more people as a result of this as well.
Now, you said something in there. When you saw your dad going through that when you were a kid, did you actually realize and have that understanding that he was suffering more than you were? Or is that something that you understand now looking back on?
It took me a while because at the beginning, I didn't realize, I knew he suffered, but I didn't understand why. So I didn't understand the mechanics of it. I understand the mechanics of it now. Because as we get older as men, we realize, like almost every single day, I'm like, damn, that's how dad felt. I understand. And I understand, like sometimes, like there will be situations in my life, and I don't drink a lot, right? I will drink, but I don't drink a lot. And sometimes I'll just be like, I'm just going to have a shot here. I connect back. I'm like, I get it. I get it. I understand. I understand. Or my dad, you know, he had other behaviors, and I'm like, I get it. Like he used to have this thing where he would drink and get his phone book and call up, I don't know how many people, and spend like 6 or 7 hours on the phone and just call his relatives from here and in India. And my mom would get so pissed. And I'm like, and I found myself doing something similar because all my friends are back in BC. I'm in Ontario, you know, calling them up. Hey guys, how you doing? Right. And then I thought, wow, I get it. Right. There's a sense of loneliness that my dad had. So those are, you know, things that pop up, but it's a great learning experience, right?
I'm laughing right now. I don't mean to, but it's called, we did it because I did it too. It's called drunk dialing. I do drunk dialing, and I would call my relatives in Norway, and I'd have this long-winded conversation drunk out of my skull in middle of the night. Like, oh yeah. Yeah. But you saw that you could see that it was out of loneliness and desperation, is that you're wanting to make connection with people. And the alcohol is the way to connect you to, well, the reason why they call alcohol spirits is because it helps you connect to, or you think it's helping you connect to spirit, but it's an artificial connection to spirit. Right.
Yep.
And so, but that's an amazing insight to see another person behaving poorly and to have the sympathy and understanding to see that they're suffering, that all negative behavior actually stems from suffering. And that is a very deep understanding and a universal spiritual truth that all of us, bad behaviors all stem from pain and suffering and fear. So anybody who's acting poorly is suffering deep down inside. And to actually see that is an amazing insight. And for the listeners, I want you to think about this too. It works also for yourself. For me, I'm better at seeing it in others than I am in myself. Like for me to stop and go, okay, Eric, oh, well, I did something wrong. I beat myself up, or I go, okay, well, why did I act that way? And if I look at it after the fact, again, 2020, and I was acting out of fear. I wasn't coming from a position of love. I was coming from a position of fear. And so I can start to understand that and go, okay, well, what is the underlying cause of that? Like, why do I have this fear? And for me, that is like I think that's a lifetime exploration, is to figure out and unpack all these layers. Like they have the saying in AA, it's like, oh, you got to peel back the layers of the onion. And I'm like, I hate that saying. And now I'm like, oh yeah, that's true. Like there's so many layers, like you just keep getting, it never ends. Like, where does it stop? Right?
Yeah. And it's a lot of the suffering, you know, this is a core concept of Buddhism, which is suffering. A lot of people don't understand what it truly means. It's, you know, we don't have to suffer. It's all self-induced, majority of it, right? We're talking about attachment. We're talking about fear. We're talking about all the other things. Not to say that loneliness is not a real thing, because it is, right? We live in a practical world today. So I think a lot of the spiritual principles of the past need to be applied to today's world. It's virtually impossible for someone to be sitting there meditating for 3 hours a day, right? Because we got work, we got careers, we got family, we got to do things. We're part of a fast-paced society. So things have changed. But I think the core principles, as you talked about, spirituality, I think that is something that is becoming more acceptable to talk about today in the Western world, which I think is very important, and particularly for men.
Yeah. And I think, again, for the listener out there, I want to really make sure they understand the difference between spirituality and religion. For me, I see a very clear delineation between the two. Being a spiritual seeker and, again, finding what connects you to your spirit. That's the thing for me. It's like figuring out how your body works, figuring out how your mind works, figuring out how your spirit connects, not trying to pigeonhole everybody into the same category and say, this is for everybody. It's not. Same thing with spirituality. Spirituality is you're seeking a higher self or purpose and understanding how you fit in with the universe. Like, how does it all interplay itself? Religion can then become, here's the doctrination, here's the rules, these are the things you have to live by. I see a big separation between the two. Spirituality is much easier to talk about. As soon as you get into religion, then that's when conflict happens and people start fighting over things. But in the spiritual realm, it's more openness, and to have that conversation, just to say, hey, what connects you to your spirit? Just to even have that conversation now. I'm having that conversation with my daughter. My parents never told me about that. I never knew anything about that in the past, right? And so for me, that is my grounding agent. That's my kind of my bedrock, is going, okay, I live in a universe that brought me here for a reason, and I'm here to figure out who this Eric guy is and how I interact in this world. Because I find that once I start figuring out who Eric is and fit it into the world and become a contributor, I'm part of. It's no longer a big, scary world. Now I'm here working with my brother Purdeep on something on the podcast, and we're going to create something new in the world. I'm going to bring my unique ability. He's going to bring his unique ability. Let's make something cool. And that's how the universe works. And that's, so for me, that's kind of my underlying base point. But for me, of course, I had to go through some serious pain and suffering, and actually, like, I'm being unconscious, and like being like your dad is being in the pain of alcoholism and just lost, like completely lost. That baseline understanding your spirit is, I think, so critical to operating from.
And you talked about it, and your experience, I think, is so critical, especially doing this podcast, because you mentioned something very important, the unconscious part. Because that's essentially what it is. It's not good or bad. It's just how conscious we become versus unconscious. Unfortunately, it's so easy to become unconscious these days, especially with technology and access to drugs and alcohol, and it's socially acceptable. And there's nothing wrong with that. I like to have a drink here and there, but when we use it as a coping mechanism, that's when it becomes a challenge. And that's where a lot of men are. In fact, when I wrote the book, The Complete Man, I didn't realize the most popular chapter from the book was on addictions. Like, that was the most popular chapter that we got feedback on. And it was really interesting, not only from men, because there was a lot of women that read the book and are reading the book, and they would provide feedback to say, okay, I think I understand my husband a little bit more when it comes to these challenges. Because the way I see, when we're coming back to spirituality, this is my analogy of it, is if we take a look at concepts such as Buddhism or whatever it may be, Buddhism, for the term Buddha, for example, means enlightenment. And that just, for me, it's turning the lights on. That's what it is. Because we are here, our true self is here. It's not like we have to find it. We just have to turn the lights on, because we're walking around in the dark a lot of times. And so for me, it's, if we take a look at our family, and I'm just going to use my analogy. I have my son and my daughter have their own rooms. My wife and I have our room, but we live in a collective household. And let's just say my son reaches a point of enlightenment or consciousness, and he turns the light on in his own room. That's his room. It's completely different than my daughter's room. Completely different. And this is really important for us as men to realize that we share a room now with the woman that we're with, right? And so that's where, when we talk about the concept of soulmates, you turn the light on, it's not just one person's room, it's both people's room. Now we're sharing our souls to a degree. And then our household is where we all share, right? We turn lights on an entire house. So our kids are in that same space. Wife, us, extended family might come in. But it's really interesting because I can't expect my son to see things my way. I can't expect my son to come into my bedroom and be like, you got to do things this way, because his bedroom is different. So for me, spirituality is very much the same way. Everybody has their own bedroom. We have to share a collective house if we're part of the same family, and collective community if we're part of the same neighborhood. But outside of that, every person experiences spirituality differently.
That is probably the most beautiful and simplified explanation of enlightenment that I've ever heard. That is awesome. I love the fact that you were mentioning that The Complete Man wasn't just a book for men, but that you got feedback from women on it. Because again, for the Viking Academy, it's not, completely focused on men, but I happen to be a man and you happen to be a man, and we're having a conversation about the complete man, but that's not what the Viking Academy is for men and for men and women, like for everybody. Right. And I'm also really hoping it's going to be a beacon and a guiding light for the younger generation. My son, Jake, he's 24 or 22 this year. And he's telling me that his friends are all kind of lost and they're trying to find purpose. And I'm hoping that the Viking Academy can be that guiding light for that. And your explanation of enlightenment and having that room, that is such a beautiful visual and a simplified understanding that it is personal, it's yours, but it also impacts others, right? And that's the part of awakening to oneself and realizing you're part of a collective whole, you're part of this whole framework of life and that you fit into it. And that I truly believe everybody's here for a reason by virtue of the fact that you're here. There's a reason, like it's almost funny. It's almost self-evident as you just go, well, is there a reason why I was born? Yeah. Well, how do I know? Because you're here.
Yeah, exactly. It's like going to a restaurant, right? Why do you go to a restaurant? Because you want to eat. Same thing with life, right? You're here. I like that. That's a good one.
So for me, the exciting part of life now for me has been where I'm no longer I'm not feeling like the victim to life. I'm realizing that life has always worked with me. And that's what I loved when I read The Complete Man, and you're going, there's a reason why you're here. And there's multiple layers to who you are as a man, and embrace it all. You don't have to be ashamed of other areas. And there's parts in the book, especially when you're looking at the woke and the DEI and all this, and, the downplay of the masculine, the men all over the world. And you stood up and said, no, be proud of being a man, being proud of who you are. I love that. It was so refreshing. And I felt good about it because I was like, yeah, I want to accept all of me. That's why, in the background you mentioned on it, if those of you who are watching the video, you can see it. If it's the podcast, visual or audio, when you will see what I'm pointing at, but I've got 3 things on my wall. One is a Viking axe, which is embracing my body. The other one is my university degree, which is embracing my mind. And then I have in the middle, it's a Viking shield with the serpent, the world serpent circling around, which is to be an image for my spirit. So my body, mind, and spirit is to remind me I'm accepting all of myself now, right? The fact that I'm a chartered accountant and I have other businesses and I'm spiritual and I've got physical, all those things. I want people to embrace and love the fact that they're here and that's who they are. And they're here to embrace all of them. And so with The Complete Man was that book that really struck me, that you're like, no, accept you for all of who you are and celebrate it and apply it. And so that for me is like, it's one of the best books I think any man looking for purpose can read. And
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are in a tough spot as men these days, very tough. And I think what you talked about in terms of your son, that is bang on. We need this. I hope young men are listening to or will listen to this podcast because it's very important. That generation needs the support. They need the guidance. They need the mentorship because it's a completely different world for them. They are being told that it's not okay to be men. They are being told, like I walked into my kid's school, this was before the summer holidays, and I was talking to his teacher because I taught my son how to play knuckles.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I said to the teacher, I'm like, oh, I'm assuming you guys don't allow kids to play knuckles here. He's like, no, man, that would never fly here. And so those are the kinds of things, boys, you don't want bloody knuckles sitting in school, but there's nothing wrong with playing games like that or having arm wrestles or whatever that looks like. That's what boys do. That's what enables them to test their strength. That's what enables them to show their masculinity. It's very important because now it's also hurting the other side. Women are now not feeling protected by the boys or men that they're around because they don't have the masculinity to be able to stand up and protect themselves, let alone the women. They can't even protect themselves these days.
Yeah. Oh, man. I see something very, not sinister, but something dark in the whole cancel masculine movement.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a level of arrogance in the part of the human psyche in the, shall we call the population, that somehow we know better than nature, that somehow it's wrong to be a man, like, or it's wrong to be this, or it's wrong to be that. Like, so in other words, it's like looking out and seeing the trees and going, you know what? Those trees are built the wrong way. They've got the wrong leaves. We need to cut them all down. Just get rid of all of them. And the earth is sitting there going, what the fuck are you doing? I made those for you guys. Like that's what I'm doing. I'm expressing life itself through this tree, but we've somehow come and said, no, that tree's got to go. That's what we're doing when it comes to men and saying men are wrong. They're bad. They're like all these things. And it's that all or nothing viewpoint on the world, which by the way, actually is like the alcoholic. The alcoholic they're an extreme, like they're egomaniacs with an inferiority complex, right? They're like, it's all or nothing. They're either above or they're below. There's no middle ground. And to say that, I'm not saying that doesn't mean that humans as individuals can do nasty things. And there's some things we want to adjust with attitudes, but just throwing the baby out with the bathwater is complete arrogance. And it's as if you're saying, we know better. We can design a better world. Like somehow you're going to design a better earth than, like, it's absolute ludicrousy.
No, and it is, and I talked about this in the book, because what determines the difference between a male and a female? It is the human brain at the age of roughly 8 weeks, where there's more vasopressor testosterone put into the brain that turns it into a male brain. That is biology. That is not society saying, oh, you need to be turning into a boy, let's rub your tummy and you're going to turn into a boy, or I'm going to sing to you a certain way and you're turning into a boy. That's biology. That is like going back to exactly what you're talking about. That's Mother Nature. We don't want to mess with that, because that took, it's, if we take a look at humans, millions of years, but evolution of beings in general, billions of years. I love what you said there, because I think it's absolutely brilliant. We don't know better than Mother Nature. We can modify certain things, but we can't go against the grain. And this is why I think a lot of guys are having problems, is because if you have a natural instinct to be a certain way and you're suppressing it, that's when anger comes out. And that anger is then seen as toxic masculinity and termed toxic masculinity. But it's a suppression of masculinity. That's the issue.
Yes, I can see that. And it's the despair and the despondency and the levels of depression that's out there that my son was talking about. He said, my friends, they give up. They just don't think they can win. They can't do anything. They just don't feel they can. Now, I'm really happy because my son is actually sees it and says, Dad, that's not going to be me. I'm not doing that. I'm going to be successful. I'm going to go and see the world. Right now he's down in the Dominican Republic. So he went down to Mexico, then he flew to Colombia, then he was Dominican Republic, and he's experiencing the world. He sends me videos every once in a while. He's engaging in the world, and he's engaging in life, and he's filled with this energy. And I have been constantly propping him up saying, yeah, like, be who you are. And who you are is a good looking dude, a good looking kid, and with physical, but just take care of people properly and be a nice guy. Like, it's not that difficult. Right? But it's this non-acceptance of who you are and why you're here and fighting it. That's part of the problem. Like, it's fighting who you are instead of accepting that the universe made you for a reason to apply it, and I've been going deep down, like, again, into the spiritual world. I've been doing a deep dive into Marcus Aurelius, the meditations of Marcus Aurelius and Stoicism. And really, when you look at all of them, they all say the same thing. Like all spiritual teachings and philosophical teaching, they all point to the same thing. And so you can see when we start veering and start trying to control and take charge and think we know better, that we create a mess.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And as you were just talking about your son, I'm like, Yeah, plus he's got a Viking for a dad, so I'm sure that helps as well.
Yeah, there could be a little bit of art imitating life or life imitating art. Now he's watched me go, but he's also seen me go through my alcoholism as well. Like, I mean, he saw all that come down and go through all that. I wanted to talk to you about a little bit more on the book side, because there's kind of like the three frameworks that you kind of built in the book. And I was wondering if you could just kind of, for the listeners, kind of highlight those three frameworks and talk a little bit about it.
Sure, yeah. So I'm a research guy. So that's like ever since I was 12 years old, I've been researching. My background's in neuroscience and performance psychology. So a scientific background. I love that. I'm still doing that today. So I like to figure out what's actually happening and experiment and come up with systems. And that's essentially it. And then be able to verbalize or structure those systems so people can understand. Because that's ultimately it. There's no point in having knowledge or anything if people can't understand it, right? So when I was a tutor or whatever it might be, I had to explain things to people. And the simplest way to explain things to people was through, hey, this is a system or this is a framework. So there are three particular buckets that us as men tend to follow. One is a performance framework, which is I'm going to simplify it here. We are built to perform. Essentially, that's it, right? We're built to perform, which means that if we're out there playing a sport, we want to be the best at that sport. We're built to do better, get better, evolve, and grow. That's performance, right? Then there's a next level or the next framework or system, which is the achievement framework. And the achievement framework is actually getting somewhere. So if we are performing and we're doing all our best, we're training, well, it's like going to the championships. If you play a sport, you want to win the championship, right? You're not going to bust your hump and do practice and sacrifice and suffer and do all the things you need to do to lose at the end of the day. If you lose, that's okay, but you're trying to win. So that's the achievement part. All guys are driven to win when they are in their state of masculinity. Key point. But there's something that we tend to forget, and that's on the softer side, right? And that's not just an element of masculinity. There's an element of feminine energy we're talking about, is the fulfillment side. And we tend to forget about that part quite a bit, which is if we're going to perform, we're going to achieve, we also want to be fulfilled in some aspect. Because a lot of guys get stuck on the hamster wheel between performance and achievement, and they never include fulfillment. So what are they constantly doing? They're constantly chasing the next goal. They're constantly chasing the next X amount of money that they want to make, or the status, or whatever it is. And they never get to a state of fulfillment. So that is the fulfillment aspect. We have to learn to be fulfilled as we are performing, as we are achieving, so that we are not on this constant, there's two ways to be on the hedonic treadmill, or you can say, or spinning your wheels. One is to go straight for fulfillment. Yeah, those are the people that love to, we're talking about, the typical, the hell, the orgies, all that kind of stuff, right? Going straight for the pleasure without putting in the sacrifice and the time. And then there's just getting stuck between performance and achievement and not focusing on fulfillment. So there's two ways that people can get screwed, men in particular. Okay, one is perform and achieve and forget about fulfillment, or just go straight for fulfillment and not focus on the performance part or the achievement part, which is about growth, right?
I love that, because I wanted to bring that in as well with the book, is that you don't just say masculine, you're 100% masculine. It's all there. This is that all or nothing, right? It's not all or nothing. It's like life is, when you look at something, it can be good and bad at the same time. That may be a bad analogy of where I'm going to go here, but there's two sides to each coin, and it's not all of one thing or all of another. It's a combination. And men have masculine traits as kind of the dominant, but they also have feminine, because there needs to be a balance in there. And the women are the same way. They're mostly feminine but they also have masculine. And so there's a combination of both in there. And it's that it was, in your book, in the techniques to master your thoughts, your feelings, your energy, so that you feel passionate and joyful going forward in life, is kind of something that didn't get taught to us as the, kids of the 70s, right? Born in the 70s or whatever. We didn't really have that. It's almost like it's been flipped on its head now. And now the whole conversation is around your thoughts and your feelings. And it's like, that's more important. So they've lost the performance and the achievement side, because that's just toxic masculinity. You can't have that anymore. Let's just talk about feelings. And you can hear from the tone of my voice where I go on that one, right? I'm a very passionate guy and I want to understand my feelings and the rest of it. But when we just go to feelings, feelings are not going to put food on the table, right? It's not going to
No.
put food on the table. It's also not going to fulfill me either. Because if I went down that road of just, and that's alcoholism, you go into that stuff, you're trying to satisfy your needs by just going lopsided. So you're not balanced, right? And I love the other part that with your frameworks is you got three, because I believe there's a magic in threes. The Father, Son, the Holy Ghost. If you start looking mind, body, and spirit, it's all there, the threes. And you've got the achievement framework, the performance framework, and the fulfillment framework. It's about combining it all together to make it work for you,
Because that's when you get true power. Like that is power. When we're talking about masculinity and being a man, or, the combination is very important, is we are built to be in a state of power. This applies to women as well, but men power is different. And we know when we're feeling powerful and when we're not. That is a reality. And majority of the times we are not feeling powerful when we are out of whack in one of those three systems or frameworks, right? So when we are performing and achieving, but not feeling fulfilled, we're not in power. Or we're going straight for fulfillment, but we're not sensing progress in ourselves or whatever that looks like. It doesn't feel like we've put in the time and effort to be able to get to where we are. So it just feels empty. So that's why it's so important, because power is extremely effective as men. And I'm not talking about the power in terms of authoritative power. I'm talking about when a person feels at their best, like they can take on challenges, regardless of what the challenge is. That's a core concept of the complete man. And so for some minutes when they used to play sports, right, they can go back to their high school days or their college days when they played sports really well and they were kicking butt. They felt like they were on top of the world. They felt like they're extremely powerful. But as we get older, we lose a lot of those elements. We lose those states of power, and we got to bring those back, because those are the states that are extremely powerful. And it's also the state that women are most attracted to as well. And it's also the state that children feel the most safety in.
Yes, that is a concept that I continually have at odds with some of the teaching that go on in the school, that is like they need to have rules. Kids need rules and to feel safe. They need to know that someone there is there and protecting them and keeping them safe. But at the same time, it's kind of power versus force is what we're talking about here. There's a difference between power versus force. You're talking about that internal power that makes you feel complete as a human, and that you've got the ability to change the things you can. Like you have some power in your life, but you're not being forceful. Forceful is like that negative part of the masculine, shall we say, where you're forcing it and you're forcing things to happen. Powerful is more having power over your life and who you are and knowing who you are. Right?
Yeah. Power is when you are directing, you can say force in the right direction. And we're not talking about resistance. So force is different, right? You're trying to push against the grain when the grain doesn't feel right. That is the difference. Because when you are in power, it's in Taoism, they talk about the way, which is it's the path. It just is. And so when we feel like it's natural, like it's in our being, like this feels right? That is power, versus this doesn't feel right, I'm going to force it. That's force. So there's a difference there.
Yeah, there's a beautiful passage in the Tao for those who it's spelled Tao, but it's pronounced Tao, and I think it's the 49th verse, and it could be applied to all politicians. Basically, it's like leave people alone and they'll settle down to their own place. Like get into the way, get into the flow of life and allow it to unfold, and things will happen wonderfully and everything will be fine. With this allowing the universe to unfold through you is allowing yourself to accept you as a whole, accepting all of you. And I love how you've taken and simplified it down, and the studies that you've done to try and simplify it down into these three systems for men to look at and say, okay, well, where am I, in the framework? And again, I highly recommend someone goes and reads the book and really understands what it's about. It's these frameworks to simplify those three areas, the achievement, the performance, and the fulfillment, so that you can start integrating it into who you are and accepting you for who you are. Because I truly believe the universe made all of us for a reason. Case in point, you're here. So why not embrace it and figure out who you are and what you're here to do? I was thinking about these three frameworks. with the achievement, performance, fulfillment, I'm not sure if it works with mind, body, and spirit, but I just kind of was looking at performance as under body, and then achievement is like mind, and then the fulfillment is like spirit. Do you know what I mean? It could almost
It can almost fit. Yeah. Yeah, I see that. Yeah, because they're in traditional times, it is, yeah, very similar in terms of that approach. So I think you can relate it to that for sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to.
Yeah,
We're meaning makers. That's the beautiful part about human.
Exactly.
We make, if anybody hasn't figured this out, humans just make shit up. Like we just make it, it's all made up. Like
it's all made up.
Everything is all made up. Life's happening and we're here and we're functioning, but we assign meaning to life. We just come up with ideas and concepts and we assign meaning to it as if this means this is good or this means it's bad. But realistically, we don't really know. But we just make the shit up and then we follow our own made up imaginary rules. I would say to people, it's like the old Sesame Street with Big Bird had his imaginary friend, Mr. Snuffleupagus. Do you remember watching? Did you watch any of those?
Oh yeah, I did.
Yeah. And I think they ruined the bloody show when they allowed everybody to see Mr. Snuffleupagus anyways. But he was like, he made it up and he was his imaginary friend. But everybody thought Big Bird was crazy because they couldn't see him. But then if we all agreed that this imaginary friend was real, then all of a sudden it becomes normal. And then that's where our psychological problems come in, is because we've attached ourselves to all these concepts and ideas that are just made up. Do you know what I mean? It's that attachment. The Buddhist teaching is attachment is suffering, right? You attach yourself to something. I love how this book goes straight at, shall we call it, some taboo subjects. And you went at it, that's the first thing I said to you after I read the book. And I was like, wow, I love the fact that you stood your ground and said, no, it's okay to be a man. Not only that, but embrace it, explore it. And if you're having problems, it's because you're probably out of whack with one of these areas.
Yeah. And it's a constant up and down. We're always out of sync, right? But the more in sync you can be, the better life becomes as well. And the better relationships we have, and the better we can be able to raise our kids. And it's never perfect. That's the whole point of being the complete man. It's always a growth journey. And for us, and I think this is, when I take a look at it, everything stems from also my grandfather in terms of his teaching. I'm not a religious person, but the core aspect of Sikhism, for example, is to be a disciple, to be a learner. And that's something that he taught me when I was 9 years old. And that stuck with me for my entire life. Always learn from every single situation. He said, everybody is a teacher, right? That's not his saying. It's an old philosophical saying. Everybody in your life is a teacher to you in some way. And so I applied that to my life. And it's like, okay, if this person, regardless of who it is, what can I learn from this person? Because every person has a skill set or knowledge or insight or experience that I don't have. So what is it that I can take from them?
And I love that. On the website, I have a quote from Krishnamurti. If you know who Krishnamurti is, he's long since passed, but he has a quote that has just resonated with me. And it's, a mind that is constantly learning can never be hurt. And I didn't realize that Sikhism had that as one of its major tenets, is that you're a disciple, you're constantly. So a mind that is constantly learning can never be hurt. And that is in complete alignment with the Viking Academy, which is be an explorer, constantly learning, constantly exploring. And I saw the Vikings were always exploring and seeking out new lands and trying to figure out what was going on, but they were physical and they were mental and they were spiritual, all combined, they combined it together. And because of that, they lived passionately and purposefully. And one other thing in there, it's just, as you were telling me about Sikhs, there's this stereotype. If you don't know, if you haven't explored and listened or read it, you only have a preconceived notion of what other spiritual teachings or religious teachings are. You have no idea until you go look. So don't judge a book by its cover. Go and open it up and read it. Go figure it out, right? Like, and you just actually spurred me on. It's like, I'm actually going to I'm going to start diving in a little bit more into Sikhism because I really don't understand it. But what you just said there was like, oh my gosh, that's completely in alignment, but I had no idea that was it. Like, that's what it meant, is to be a disciple and to be a constant learner. So again, this is why I'm so excited about the Viking Academy. See, man, I get to have you on board. I get to showcase you and your knowledge and give people resources. And then I get to learn at the same time.
And we get to have an awesome conversation. That's the part.
Like, fucking win-win-win.
Yeah, yeah,
all
exactly.
day long, all day long. Oh man. Okay. So you and I are going to have to talk again, but before we go, can you please let people know where they can find the Complete Man and your teachings, and if they want to reach out to you?
Sure. Yeah. So if you're looking for the physical copy, people can go to completemanbook.com. So that's a simple one. If you're looking for the digital audio ebook, you can go to completemanaudio.com, and the promo code is victory5. So victory and then the number 75 altogether. And you can get 75% off the digital audio and ebook.
Awesome. Oh, I like that. The listeners will love that. You've got a new website. I saw the new branding.
Oh, the branding. Yeah, you did.
Yeah, I did, dude. We didn't even get even close to on the business side yet. But
Yeah.
what's your new website?
So it's PurdeepSangha.com.
Okay, but what's Sangha X?
Oh, so Sangha X, it's kind of the new brand that we have.
Yeah.
Because through the branding exercise, we kind of said, what does this all come back to? What do all the companies come back to? What is everything on the business side? And it really comes down to what we are talking about, the X factor, right? That's really what it is. And there's a play off there when it's kind of like a multiplication effect, but it's really finding that X factor for whether you're, focusing on the business side or on the personal side. And that X factor is that power force, right? It's the multiplier. It's getting the results. It's feeling the fulfillment. It's all those different things. But that's essentially the brand that we have created for that.
Okay, good. Okay, so that leaves us into a perfect segue for me to then rebook a new podcast so you and I can do a conversation about Sangha X on the MBA Way podcast, my other podcast for the other business that I have. We'll set that up for there. But for the listeners out there, you got it. So you've got the URL for the hard copy of the book. You've got the discount code for the audio version. And if you want to find them, PurdeepSangha.com. You're doing coaching for business owners and men, right? Preferably combine of the two.
Yeah, that's an area. And we do a lot of other stuff too, business advisory services. But that's, in this context, work with men, professional men, either in high performance for themselves or business growth on that side.
Okay, there you go. We got many more podcasts in the future. Thanks for being on, man.
Hey, this was awesome. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Viking Academy podcast. Make sure to leave us your honest feedback by leaving a review on Apple or Spotify and hit subscribe so you never miss an episode.